Desiree, what should an author do when they type the words "the end"?
They should put the book away for a while, set the manuscript aside, go back and read it maybe 2 weeks, a month, even 3 months later. And then they're going to have those fresh eyes that they need to see it anew and see maybe some of the flaws, some of the things that need to be fixed. And then they should call up a developmental editor and have them go through it. And then they might want to pull in a few beta readers to help them further flesh things out. And then a line editor and a copy editor. And at the end, depending upon if they're going to self-publish that book or if they're going to go with a publisher, they might be bringing in still a final proofer to really make sure the manuscript is actually at the end.
Okay, so this is not a light thing like where you can rush. Like it needs time to breathe. It needs several sets of eyes.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the mistakes that a lot of authors make, especially new authors. We have this idea, this perception, and maybe we've heard it in the past or we've just imagined it. You know, the author is this person that goes off into this cabin in the woods and they write their opus. And it seems like a very solitary experience. But in actuality, again, depending upon whether they're self-published with a small press or with even one of the big 4 or 5 publishers, they need a team behind them, especially nowadays in order to be competitive. So if they are going the traditional publishing route, there's a good chance that that publisher is going to bring in a certain amount of editors to help them. But even getting to that stage, oftentimes, they need to get the manuscript in as tip-top of shape as possible because there's a lot of competition out there in the publishing world. And those acquisition editors see a lot of manuscripts come across their desk. So if a manuscript is further along, it's going to set them apart. And if that author is self-publishing or going with a smaller press that might not have that staff, then they definitely are going to want to make sure that it goes through all those stages of editing before it's complete.
Okay, so we're looking at even once the end is typed, maybe even a year or so before it's actually out in the sort of the public sphere.
Yeah, it varies. The path to publishing, if you're going the traditional route, that's going to be at least 18 months, if not longer, because at that point, what you're going to be doing is looking for a literary agent. And that literary agent, usually it's about a year. I've seen it all the way up to 2 or 3 years. They're going to shop it around for you. They're going to contact publishers. They're going to try to find you that coveted book deal. And that takes time. Even if you get those 2 things to happen super fast, which it really doesn't usually happen that fast, the publishers themselves are often working on a schedule that's at least a year in advance. So 18 months is a very kind estimate. It can take 2 or 3 years. The publishing industry takes a very, very long time. But then you have those smaller indie presses. And there's also hybrid presses that are now in the mix. So they're a little bit more agile. They can move a little bit faster for the author. And a lot of times they rely on the author to bring some of their skills and a little bit more to the table than a traditional larger publisher might. And then there's also the path an author takes if they want to self-publish or create their own imprint. That's something that a lot of authors are doing today, and it works better with different genres. But for the sake of this question, yeah, you then have the ability to move super fast. But just because you can move super fast doesn't mean that you necessarily should. That's where you really still need all of those different forms of editors to come in and help out. But even in that case, you probably want to give yourself at least 6 months, depending upon the genre, depending upon the manuscript, depending upon if it's relying on other books in a series, etc., in order to get the book out there.
Awesome. I'm wondering, what is a hybrid publisher? Can we explain?
Sure. So in the world of publishing, I say the big four, big five, there's a little bit of consolidation happening in the industry. So those are the big presses that have been around for many years, and they have many different imprints underneath them. And then you have the indie or the small presses that are kind of in the middle, and then you have the self-published author. So a new cottage industry that's popped up in recent years is this concept of the hybrid press. Essentially, they're going to help an author publish their book. They're going to be the publisher. But unlike traditional publishing deals or traditional book deals, they're paid an upfront fee for it. Usually in the publishing world, when that author gets that agent, like I described a little bit ago, they get the agent and they get the book deal, that agent is going to make their money off of the book deal. That's why the agent is representing them. That's why they want to do it. And the publisher is publishing the book because they see the opportunity. They see the marketability of it. They understand that if they put that, in their catalog, they're going to make so many sales. That's what they're looking at. So the hybrid presses that exist out there are doing a lot of the work that a publisher will do, but instead of making the money off the back end, they're making it off the front end. And there's some controversy on hybrid presses within the industry. I've worked with many and know of many who are very above board, very honest, wonderful to work with. They really care about the authors, and they're doing it because, quite frankly, a lot of authors can't do all of that themselves. This whole idea of being a self-published author and then you're doing all of the things that a publisher can do is daunting. I don't know many authors who really can pull that off well. It's the expectation that somebody can be a unicorn and can do the marketing and the editing and the book cover design and the layout and the metadata, the keywords, all of that. Not to mention they're probably going to be asked to have a website, social media presence, all of those things, the marketing of the book, as well as actually getting the distribution out there, is a lot for an author who is a self-published author to do. And then on the other end of the spectrum, with the hybrid presses, you have a lot of unsavory sorts out there, unfortunately. They're giving a bad name to the industry because they're there to make money, to get paid up front. A lot of times they deliver subpar services to the authors. They're not necessarily getting the distribution that they should. I've seen some hybrid presses that are really restrictive with the cover art even, which to me, if you're gonna be self-published or with a hybrid press, that's one of the things that an author should probably have a little bit more say over. That control, that whole idea of control is the spectrum that an author is living on nowadays, all the way from self-published to traditional publishing. And with that hybrid press somewhere in the middle, as long as they're doing the right thing for the author, listening to the author, and doing their best to get the distribution, then I think those hybrid presses have a place in the industry.
And forgive me, is that considered a vanity press?
Back in the day, that's exactly what they called them. And there's a lot of folks out there who will say it's just vanity presses with a new name. There's a few nuances, a few differences, though, with what we might consider a vanity press. So one of the things with vanity presses is, and we can thank Amazon a lot for what they did and, just creating this equal playing field for authors. But with vanity presses, a lot of times you were buying, hundreds, even thousands of books. Authors were storing them in their basements or their garages, and they really didn't have the distribution in place to actually sell those books. And that title of being with a vanity press, it was like just a scarlet letter that an author would wear. Many years ago, I worked at a radio station in Los Angeles, and it was during the LA Times Festival of Books, which is a big event in LA, and Howard Rosenberg, who at the time was the TV critic for the LA Times, he came in the studio to do an interview and to talk about his book that was coming out. And I remember him telling me that self-published authors, anybody with a vanity press, in other words, don't do that. So at this point in time, that was easily probably about 20 years ago. But a lot has happened since then. A lot that benefits the authors. When Amazon came along and basically made it so that anybody can publish a book, it really changed the dynamic of the industry. And that's where you see so many self-published authors that were actually making money. And that scarlet letter, was no longer a thing within the industry. Heck, it only took a few years. It was probably around 2008, 2010, when a lot of self-published authors were doing better than their traditionally published counterparts. Now, I mentioned genre before. Genre matters. I do see a lot of authors who feel that, oh, I've heard self-publishing is a thing and you can make a lot of money doing it. Gee, I'm just going to do that. But maybe their genre or the style of their book doesn't lend itself to that. Genres like romance, genre fiction, a lot of times do very, very well in that space. And a big part of the reason is romance readers, they're ravenous. They'll read 2, 3, 4 novels in a week. Whereas somebody who's, reading hard science fiction and the book is 3 times as long as one romance novel, it's a slower read. So you just don't have that fan dedication. The other thing that romance authors have going for them is their mad networking skills. If you want to write romance, I recommend going out and finding your community because it's there. Because of the fact that their fan bases will read books so fast, a lot of those romance writers will work together. They'll share their marketing and their email lists. They'll cross-promote each other. They'll collaborate on projects. They'll go into anthologies together. So there's a lot of collaborative activity happening with romance writers because of that fact. And then again, if somebody has written literary fiction or something along those lines, then self-publishing may not necessarily be the best path for them. But it really just depends upon the writer, upon their goals. And going back to what we talked about before, how much time they're willing to wait in order to see their book on the shelf.
Desireé, what did you do when you finished your book, Oubliette?
Oh, I learned all of the mistakes that I now try to help other authors avoid. So at the time, I was the vice president of a marketing agency. Been doing marketing and PR for many years. And I thought, I know how to do this. I can market a book. And then I realized that the marketing and PR industry, as it relates to books, is a totally different thing. And I also realized there weren't a lot of marketers and PR firms out there that were doing for books what an agency can do for other types of products or services. So that was actually the inspiration for me to start my own firm, because as I was launching my own book, I realized I didn't know as much as I thought I did. And the good news there is now I work with authors and I help them with their books.
And so, may I ask what year this was?
This was in 2015. And I don't want to date this video right now, but the book series, and it's turned into a series, is currently being rewritten. And I think that's one of the great things, not only about books, but storytellers in general. We see new revisions of stories again and again. So learning from some of my mistakes and looking at the expansiveness of the book. I made too big of a book and I realized, it needed to be a series. I needed to break this down. And as soon as I accepted that, I was able to flesh out some of the characters and the backstory and really have been having a good time rewriting it. So Oubliette, the series, is now going to be coming soon.
If you are interested in storytelling, you may also like our new book, Story Questions, the sponsor of today's video. It's a story tool that offers you over 1,500 story questions that you can use as story prompts. It's packed with over 40 categories, so whether you are in the brainstorming stages, developing characters, dialogue, or rewriting, it can help you at every stage of the writing process. Think about this statement. Most powerful stories are just great answers to strong questions. We've linked up to story questions in the information section below. Now back to the interview.
Desireé, what are the first few things you say to an author who comes to you for publicity regarding their book?
The first thing I want to know is what their goals are, because that's going to indicate what kind of a marketing and PR package we're going to do. Generally speaking, I want them to come to me with enough time so that we can do a program that's called the Author Network. And it's just a 6 or 8 month long retainer with the book launch in the middle so that we have enough time to do the pre-launch marketing stuff, and then enough time to do some of the PR and other post-book launch marketing stuff. And I think that's one of the mistakes a lot of authors make, is they feel now that the book is done and it's going to be released soon, now I'm ready for the marketing. And I want to start with them at least 3 to 4 months in advance, because there's certain things that we need to do that impacts the marketing. For example, getting advanced reviews. That's a biggie. And getting advanced reviews, as the name implies, means doing it in advance. So we have a team of book reviewers. We use some tried and true platforms such as NetGalley, which a lot of the publishers out there use. And we're promoting the book on social media and our own newsletter, etc., to get those advanced reviews. And you need to give that book reviewer enough time to request the book, read it, write the review, and post the review. So all of that takes time. If you've ever wondered, how do we get advanced reviews for books before they're even on the market? Because you've seen that before. The book isn't even out yet, but you'll see blurbs about a book or somebody from the New York Times shouting out this book. It's because once upon a time, back in the days, those galley copies, that's what they were called, galley copies. And even back then, they didn't even have cover art or anything, but they would be mailed out to different folks within the industry, to press, to librarians, to media people, to different folks at bookstores, chains, so that they could read the book in advance and decide whether or not they were going to stock it. Nowadays, that whole system is still in place, but getting some of those advanced reviews out there. So again, those librarians and those bookstore buyers, people in the industry, think of it this way. It's like that B2B or business to business strategy. That way they can do what they need to do in order to, decide whether or not they're going to pick up that book. And then there's several different other things along the way. I tend to work with all of the authors on their branding. In other words, their talking points, the message they want to get out there, because that matters. Nowadays, authors definitely are brands more so than they might have been in the past. Some authors will embrace that. Some are a little bit skeptical. But when we're doing the media interviews for them after the book is launched, we want to make sure that they're ready to talk on camera, do radio interviews, podcast interviews, etc. So that, retainer that has all of those different services, you can kind of imagine it happening over a span of 6 to 8 months, all needs to be strategized. And once I know what it is that they really want, and sometimes I have to pull that out of them a little bit, because it's really easy to say, oh, I just want the world to know about my book. Yes, we all do. That's why all the writers have written all the words in the world. But are you here because you want to make money? And is that literary fiction novel you wrote that's 200,000 words really going to be that marketable? I can tend to be a little bit harsh and honest with authors, because there's a good chance they've been told their writing is great, they've been motivated to do this, and not that I want to break their spirit, but depending upon what they really want to get out of this, I need to know if I can help them or not. In some cases, authors want their story out there because they want to leave a legacy behind. I've worked with authors who were in the war and they just wanted their story out there for the world, but more importantly for their family, their grandkids, their great-grandkids, etc. There's folks that write business books or self-help books, something that can help with their own professional career. That's a totally different strategy too. And I want to be able to look at what they need and want and maybe adjust my packages to suit them. So knowing what their goals are, what they really want to achieve, and making sure that I have the system and the package in place that suits that is what's most important to me.
And going back to reviews for a moment, did you also mention possibly reviews on the back of the book? Is that where you're also giving time for these reviewers so you can have those blurbs?
Yes. And let me parse that down a little bit more, if I may, because all book reviews are not exactly the same. And sometimes the term book review is more generic, whereas we can parse them out a little bit. Because yes, you have the book reviews from somebody like a celebrity endorsement, and let's just call those endorsements. I prefer that term. New York Times, or somebody who is an expert in the field. If it's a book, maybe that's leaning a little bit more toward academia or something that's science-based or medical. You might have somebody who's an expert, a PhD, etc. Blurb the back of the book. The blurb, by the way, when I say that, is just the back cover copy. And that's usually where you see those pithy quotes back there that somebody said something. So those, as a general rule, might not necessarily be picked up from NetGalley. I'm not saying it can't be, but usually those types of reviews are going to happen from either the publisher. Sometimes the publisher is working with other authors in that genre. You see that a lot. You know, this romance author is blurbing that romance author, or you know, this horror writer is talking about this other horror writer. In some cases, it might be who the author themselves know. If they went to a university or school and they have other professionals that are within their sphere who can, you know, give that quote, that's also oftentimes a really good way to do it. Sometimes it could be a celebrity, you know, or an athlete. Maybe the book is a sports book and there's an NFL player or a baseball player or somebody that can talk about the book. They give the book credibility. You're borrowing the credibility from that entity, that brand, that celebrity. Again, if it's the New York Times or some kind of a magazine along those lines, that's where you're getting that kind of review. Now, there's also reviews from places like Kirkus, just an industry standard. I often use it as an example. There's a few others that are out there just off the top of my head, Library Journal, Edelweiss, etc. These are more like industry type sites that offer book reviews. And it's a paid review. But what it can do for the author, and sometimes people bristle a little bit, oh, it's a paid review. But also the librarians and the bookstore buyers are going to use Kirkus as a trusted source. Again, they're looking at this in advance because they want to start stocking the shelf with these books, and they want somebody out there who's an authority to, you know, validate them or let them know if this is a good book to stock or not. So with those types of reviews, you can also put those on the back cover too. In the case of Amazon and some of the retail sites, there's also even a place for editorial type book reviews. And that's another term that you'll hear a lot for these types of paid editorial type reviews. These are the ones, again, that you pay for. And on Amazon, there's even a section when you're filling out your author page, your profile, your A+ content, as any author out there who uses Amazon might be familiar with. That is where you want to put those editorial type reviews. So even if you're on Amazon, you're just kind of looking around, you can see there's the consumer reviews, right? And the verified reviews, because Amazon decided to put a little verified sticker next to the ones who have bought from Amazon. But then you can also see the editorial type of reviews. And again, those can be put on the back cover, on somebody's website, used in their social media, etc. And then the other type is the consumer type reviews. So those are the folks that are buying the book, they're giving that honest review. They can be some of the harshest ones out there because they're not going to pull back any punches. Sometimes I'll read a Kirkus review or an editorial review, and it's almost like you can read through the lines. The reviewer is saying, this is a nice slow burn. What's a slow burn a euphemism for, right? Maybe it dragged a little bit. But a consumer review is going to tell you the truth in a lot of cases, and they can be harsh. But that is also one of the ways that consumers, readers, evaluate their next read. We all do it, don't we? And not only just with books, and especially if we're doing any kind of a big ticket item, we look at the reviews. What are other people saying? So reviews are one of the most powerful marketing tools that an author and me, when I'm doing their marketing PR, that we have. And to come back full circle, if I don't have 3 or 4 months to get some of those reviews in advance, it makes it really hard to do the promotion for the book when it comes time to launch.
Whether you're working with someone or not, as a new author, what if someone thinks that their book is perfect? Doesn't need too much more handling?
I'm going to look at that book and I'm going to tell them exactly what I think. I often say to that new author, this is me being honest. And truth be told, if somebody can't handle that honest opinion, then they're probably not an author that I would choose to work with. I can be rather discerning when it comes to that. There's a lot of marketers out there who are more than willing to take an author's money, but I want to make sure that that book is going to be successful. And I've had it happen many times where the author came to me, they said, I just need a final proofing, and I start looking at it and I realize, you need a developmental editor. Who did your dev edit? What's that? And then I know that unfortunately that author took that manuscript too far, because those stages should be followed. Dev edit, line editing, get some beta readers between those two, copy editing. So if they start skipping those and the manuscript isn't up to par, I'll let them know. If they really are open to learning and accepting the fact that they still need some work with the manuscript, I can either help them with a referral, or a lot of times they might know somebody that they can go to as well.
And maybe just for my own knowledge, just a Reader's Digest version of what is a dev editor, what is a line editor, copy editor?
Oh, sure, yeah. Dev editing, or content editing, as it sometimes is called, is the big picture stuff. This is making sure the whole manuscript comes together, story, plot, characters, big, broad strokes. So you can imagine if those big, broad strokes aren't addressed, it creates a trickle effect all the way down. Because it doesn't matter then how well it was copy edited. Great, you have a manuscript that, everything, all the syntax and punctuation and grammar is good, but you need to go back and totally retool this character's arc, or you need to explain more of this setting. So that's the big content or dev edit. In some cases too, I'll throw in there, I'll sneak in there, sometimes a ghost doctor or ghost editor. We've all heard of somebody who's a ghost editor. Sometimes the line between ghosting, where it's totally writing the book for somebody, and doing that developmental editing can be blurred. In some cases, the author can only get it so far, and just having somebody go in there and fix it up is what they need. Then the next stage, once the story, the big picture stuff, once that's all finished, you can send it out to some beta readers. And maybe you want to send to beta readers in advance. There's different stages where you can send to those beta readers, but beta readers are just that. Folks that are going to read the book and maybe come to you with, I like this part, I didn't like that part. They're not necessarily a developmental editor in the sense that they're going to address the problems and tell you how to fix it. They're just identifying stuff for you. And there's some beta readers who you pay a small fee to. In some cases, if you want to ask your Aunt Betty to be your beta reader, or your cousin who's an English teacher, I say that's great, but just take those opinions with a little grain of salt, because sometimes they're going to be a little bit softer than somebody who is just honestly going to give you that feedback. taking a quick step back too to like Kirkus and some of those editorial type reviews. Another reason why you want to do those far in advance, even farther than that 3 and 4 month deadline I said before. Some of those you can do even 6 months in advance. But it is so that you could also take that editorial review. And if they're identifying any issues, if they come back with a less than stellar review, now you have time to make those fixes. So having some different opinions in there is really valuable. Then the line edit, that's just what it sounds like, going through line by line, looking for the consistency issues, just making sure everything is flowing, has good pacing, etc. Copy editing, I think folks are probably more familiar with that. It's just what it sounds. It's grammar and syntax and spelling, typos, things like that. And then proofing. Proofing is just, it's almost like another copy edit. At that point, they're looking to make sure it is absolutely perfect. I have some hard news for authors. Usually a manuscript, a book, even books that are put out by some of the big publishers have a typo or two in there. Nobody's going to catch everything, but that final proofing a lot of times will catch things that the other editors missed. And one more thing to note, and some editors might not like me saying this, but I think it's important for authors to know too. There are lots of editors out there who can do all the types of editing. And I'm not saying they can't do them. It's all a matter of if they should do it with your manuscript. Because if they're doing the content and the line editing and the copy editing, they themselves start to miss things too. Having a couple of sets of eyes in there. That's why I kind of like to throw those beta readers in there like that. You just get a fresh perspective, something that everybody else missed. And I've seen manuscripts go through all of the editing processes, get all the way to the point where we're getting some of those editorial reviews, which we thought were going to be awesome. And boom, there's a plot hole in it that nobody else caught. So those are the different types of editing and why they're so important.
I love it. I'm jumping ahead maybe slightly here, but is there a beta tester for the cover?
That's a really good question. So with cover design, I always recommend that you find somebody who does covers, not just an artist, because there's a certain skill set to doing covers. And when they do that, a lot of times you can ask for a couple of different mock-ups. And I've done it already where I've gone to, I think for one of our authors, the record was we had 10 different artists all doing at least one mock-up. In the end, that author, of course, wanted somebody else completely different. But in a case like that, the author and us were able to look at all these covers and all of these concepts and decide what she wanted. And it was actually, when she saw them and started, oh, I kind of like this and that, and, then went and found somebody else. But it gave her the vision, especially for folks who might not be visual people. We all learn and understand and perceive our world differently. Authors obviously are dealing with words, but for somebody who's a creative that visualizes things, they don't visualize things, being able to see it is absolutely what they need to decide whether or not they like it or not. So in cases like that, yeah, you can get lots of different comps and decide from there. If you're with one of the a publisher though, like one of the bigger publishers or maybe a small indie press, again, it kind of varies a little bit. Generally speaking, they're going to have their cover designer do the artwork for you, and the author loses a little bit of their control when that happens.
And just as a follow-up, I get that romance novels will have, two very good-looking people on it, but in terms of something that's maybe, let's say, a vacation sort of memoir or whatever, it could be a fictional recount of a trip or something, would it be best to not actually do anything where there's a person on the cover and just have it a drawing of, let's say, the Greek, Isles or something? I mean, or the, sort of the Greece, Mm-hmm. So, something that wouldn't eliminate one reader versus the next.
The genre matters. So you mentioned romance in there, and I think we all know what those bodice ripper covers look like, and you got the hunky guy with the chest. And you might think to yourself, why do they always do that? Because it always sells the books. That's the expectation of the reader. When the reader sees that, it's branding, right? They know exactly what they're going to get out of that book. So different genres and different trends in publishing change over time. So one of the pieces of advice I would give to an author who might be on the self-publishing side or working with somebody where they have the say in the cover design, one of the first things that you should do is go look at those covers in your genre. What are some of the trends and the colors that they're using? The horror genre, for example, generally you want something dark, got greens in there. Usually it's like a lime green or a purple. Purple can be spiritual or supernatural, something along those lines. So look at the colors and the styles. Is it a spy novel? I think we all know, we visualize right away the running man on the spy cover, right? It's like the guy running and maybe he's dropping a gun, or he's got a gun. It's a silhouette. So, a stick figure in that sense, people are going to identify, ooh, that's a spy novel, or that's the running man. But even then, looking at what they're doing in contemporary fiction matters as well. So see where those trends are going in your genre to really get a feel for what your cover should be. I also think that sometimes authors kind of have this vision in their head of what their cover should be, and getting a few different artists to throw some ideas at them can really help them not only pull it all together in their head, but again, offer some different perspectives and things that they might not have thought of. And if that cover designer, if that artist really knows their industry and knows the market, they can be a real asset to that author.
And lastly, have you seen where a cover has gone to market, the book's been out, and it's not selling well, and they change the cover and it completely changes the trajectory of the book?
It can definitely happen. And if you actually look at a lot of fiction, if you look at a book that's been on the market for a while, if you just Google it, you'll probably see different iterations of that cover. Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale comes to mind, and I think it's rather iconic. We can visualize the red robe and the white bonnet, right? But I've seen that motif done in different ways on her covers, because now that book has been out for a little while. So sometimes changing it up, to your point, absolutely can revitalize the sales of that book. Another thing that folks can do too, depending upon it works really well with nonfiction, but fiction can do it as well. So if you have a book that came out a few years ago and there's some new information that you want to add to that book, times change, information gets updated, you can do a second edition. We've all seen second editions of books as well. So sometimes, if it's been a few years and you want to breathe new life into a title, you can bring out a second edition. You can then change up the cover and give it a new look and feel. Add a couple of chapters. I think the percentage is supposed to be 17% different for it to officially be a second edition, though I know of nobody who has ever gone through and measured that. But what I advise to authors that might be considering kind of refreshing their book, giving it a new cover, it's like if you're going to do that and the book has been out for a while, you might as well come out with a second edition, make some changes. Even authors who might have released a book, I'm working with a couple of them right now, released a book a while back, self-published it, then they found a publisher, so they retooled the story, they have a new book cover, and it's like the book is coming out anew.
And would they have to then go to the Library of Congress or to do you would do a new version of your copyright?
Yeah. So you want to get a new ISBN number, a new Library of Congress number. Publishers, again, generally can help you with that. Small presses can too. So can hybrid. I always caution authors, though, to own your own ISBN because you don't want to give control of your IP to somebody else. But all of that is relatively easy to do. You can go to to get your ISBN. There's, you have to register and do the Library of Congress number. But you kind of want to have everything fresh and new. You want this to look and feel like a whole new book.
We'd love to hear more about the writing process that you took for your first book. Can you talk about what some of the first steps were?
I was absolutely pantsing it. I had the idea, and I still love my original idea, which is why I'm redoing Oubliette. But I just started writing, and I was very much going in chronological order. At least for me, writing chronologically doesn't actually make sense. I found, now that I'm rewriting it, jumping around, going through a whole character's arc as a pass, and then another one, and then bouncing back, establishing things early on that you see in this through line that goes all the way through. That's what worked for me. So I definitely began as a pantser, as they're called, flying by the seat of my pants. And then in retrospect, I realized, ooh, I should have been a little bit more of a plotter. I think folks generally fall somewhere in the middle of that pantser plotter spectrum. But in some cases, folks will want to plot out every little thing. I do think that there's a little bit of the organicness and the spontaneity that can be lost, at least for myself, when just totally plotting things out. But at least for me, that's, from a brass tacks point of view, that helps me. I also am a fan of doing a book series Bible. In other words, laying out the plot of each book. And, the first couple of books in the series are pretty defined. But as I'm writing, then I realize I'm adding more things. It's like the old analogy of when you're driving a car at night. Got the headlights on. You can see so far in front of you, right? You know your destination 100 miles away. You understand that you're traveling there, but there's going to be stuff that happens along the way. And I think we need to allow ourselves just a little bit of grace to expect the unexpected. If a deer comes running out, you're going to slam on the brakes. And sometimes authors need to do that too. I know so many authors who are like, I was writing my book and all of a sudden one of my characters walked into the room and said, no, that's not what I would do. And they realize as they're doing this, a certain amount of magic happens along the way.
And when you began writing your book, you were working a full-time job?
Right? Yes.
So you were doing this on the weekends or at night or lunch hour? Or?
Exactly. The concept came to me when I was watching one of those Travel Channel shows about haunted places around the world. And they were doing one on Leap Castle in Ireland. And they were talking about how in the late 1800s, they emptied it out and they found the remains of over 150 individuals who had died there over the centuries. And I was hooked. So that's what an oubliette is. It's like this pit or dungeon, and it literally translates into a forgotten little place in French. So that idea that all of these people were thrown in there and forgotten is what set up the book Oubliette. And I wanted to have all of these storylines. I had this vague idea of it being a little bit like Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, if you remember that, where he had all these kind of like short stories that revolved around Mars. I would have all these short stories that revolved around the oubliette and have all of these different stories of people that happened throughout different times in history. The French Revolution, the time of the Black Death, the Reformation, all of these, points in history that are just so tantalizing, especially in France. I know the castle was in Ireland. I have a thing for French castles, so I decided to put my castle in French. But that was where the idea came from. And then, to your point, I just started writing at night, weekends, whenever I would find time. I would go out on writing retreats. I traveled to France. I went to Loire Valley where I put my castle before I even had gone there. And then I toured the castles and I was just like, getting all those little pinpricks of just the magic that I was experiencing, seeing these places that I had decided to write about using nothing more than, Google and a few books to do the research. So, for anybody who is thinking about this, how do they juggle their jobs, their parenting, their school, their whatever, find that time to write. A lot of people will tell you, find some time in the morning or at night, whenever you can do it, and get a little bit down every day. And to me, I think that's the best way to go about it, is just start getting that pen on the paper and go.
And was it your plan to write and publish under your name, Desireé Duffy, or did you have a nom de plume planned?
In the beginning, I really didn't know. I didn't think about it. But when I got ready to publish my book, I was vice president of a marketing agency. And I realized this dark fiction novel that I wrote seemed a little bit at odds with my professional life. For me, the choice to have a nom de plume was more about just wanting to keep my brand messaging very, very different. And there's different reasons somebody might want to do a nom de plume. For me, it's not like it's a secret that I write under a nom de plume. It was just a choice that I made at the time so that I could have my day job and do the things that I did professionally and almost have like this alter ego come out, which in a way is a little bit fun. And I was able to kind of lean into that side of my personality. And Vanta and Black is my nom de plume's name. People ask where that came from, and I took forever finding that. But it came from, many years ago, they started talking about the color, Vanta Black. Vanta Black is the blackest black that ever was. And I separated it, Vanta Black. I think I was 2 weeks away from getting the website Vanta Black. Somebody else got the URL.
Oh.
And so I threw in the M, which is an homage to my grandmother, who was Matilda. So it's technically Vanta Matilda Black. But that's where the name came from, and that was my reason for having the two. Now, I do stress to any author who is thinking about doing the same is look at the reason behind that. Do you realize that by having two different personalities, you're going to have two different brands to work with, and that can mean double the work. If the author wants to write books under two different names, especially then, in my case, I had professional Desireé and then my nom de plume. So it was easy enough because anything that fell under the writing world went under my nom de plume. But if you have two different genres you're writing under, then having more than one nom de plume, now you're two different authors. That might mean having two different websites, social media, because your audiences are going to call for different messaging, different approaches. And in some cases, I've known authors who can juggle having multiple genres under their belt, and they can do it with grace, and they can handle going back and forth. A lot of it also depends upon the types of books that they're writing. If they're in the genre fiction space, and maybe one of them is horror and one of them is sci-fi, not too far off. I can see that working. There's some crossover in your audience there. Amazingly, at one point, I met an author. I don't know how she does it, but she writes erotica and children's books under one name, which is something that I would usually advise not to do. And that kind of goes to the reasons for writing under a nom de plume. Another one of the reasons might be because you do want to keep what you're writing totally secret, totally on the down low. So just be aware of what that means as well. If you are an elementary school teacher and you're writing erotica, what happens to your job if they find out? What happens if the school board finds out, or an angry parent? There could be ramifications for that. Obviously, in that case, you probably would want to keep those two things very separate. So it really just depends upon what you want to do and why you want to do it, and realizing ultimately that if you are going to have more than one name that you're writing under, that it might be increasing the workload as well.
And so when you go to copyright the book under this nom de plume, you're mentioning your real name, or this is now your sort of business name, the nom de plume?
Getting a copyright for the book, when you write a book, when you write something, you, by virtue of writing it, are copywriting it. So when you register with the Library of Congress, You need to make sure that you're putting it under the publishing name or the name that you're using. That's another thing that we'll see folks do. They'll kind of offhandedly be like, oh, my name is William Smith, and then they publish under the name Bill Smith. So you want to make sure those things match up, definitely.
Desiree, do you believe that we are all antennas during the writing process and that everybody has access to the same source?
That is such a tantalizing question. I know so many authors, and when they talk to me, it's almost like they're revealing it. It's their secret. And they'll say things like, I felt like I was channeling somebody else's story. I felt like the universe was telling me this story. It just came to me. I was in a flow state and the creativity just came. So referring to it as an antenna and just knowing that different authors seem to be describing the same thing, but in different ways, really makes me wonder. I don't know what that is. I don't know if there really is some kind of zeitgeist force in the universe that feeds us story. I do know, though, that as humans, story, I think, is what makes us so different from all of the other animals. I'm pretty sure whales are telling stories and dolphins are too, not to take that away from them. But we learn by story. We used to sit around fires and explain how to hunt through storytelling. We use stories to feed our spiritual needs, to talk about gods and monsters and things in the world. We love stories. If you want to find that joy and that love of story, sit down with a couple of 4-year-olds. I have grandkids, and when they sit on my lap and they're like, Grammy, tell me a story, they just crave it. They want to hear it. And I think that feeds into our need to learn about the world, to understand through a different character's eyes, so that we can learn how to behave, how to act, what to do in this scenario. So whether it's a horror novel or suspense where you're running from the monster, having that feed through us and come as story, well, it's safer, for example, than running away from the monster, right? But we still have the ability to learn from that and to experience that. Or if we're being whisked away on, to your Greek island on some romantic adventure, we're living another life. And I think that desire and that need for us to live in stories as well as be storytellers is what ultimately makes us human.
Desiree, what do you love about the writing process?
I think when all of the things start to come together, when in my own manuscript, I've written the story and I'm doing some of the final passes, and I realize something that I wrote here at the end could be foreshadowed in the beginning, and I start this bouncing back and forth, adding just a little hint of something. I don't write mysteries, but in a way, mystery writers will do, I'm often told, something similar, because they need to kind of plot out this whole scenario, this whole whodunit, but then they need to put those clues, those little breadcrumbs along the way. So for me, kind of interspersing those little nuggets and adding an Easter egg here, or giving you some insights to somebody's personality, the way they say something that kind of doesn't make sense at the time, and then 5 chapters later, then you've got that callback. One of the things that I love about certain books, certain stories in general, movies, is when you're able to experience it differently the second time around reading it or watching it. I think we've all had those moments where there was a story and we devoured it and we just dug right in. We sat back and then we started watching it again, and all of a sudden we had those moments of, oh, I didn't realize, oh, that's how that happened. So for me as a writer, when I'm doing that in the story, those little moments, those flashes, that's just delicious to me.
How do you believe that the creative process works?
It works different for everyone. I could never tell somebody that you must sit down and write 2 hours a day in the morning, the minute you woke up, They might not have morningness. By the way, morningness apparently is a genetic trait. I just found that out not too long ago. They might be that night owl and they want to write at night. They might need the stimulation of reading other books within their genre or watching movies that are within their genre. Well, a few things that I like to suggest to people with that creative process, especially if you get stuck or you're not sure where to go next, is read outside your genre, or if you're already doing that, watch movies or TV shows outside your genre. Step outside of whatever box you're in that feels like this is where you're supposed to be to get your creative inspiration, and just do something different. Instead of taking that trip to that Greek island because you like things that are nice and warm and comfortable, maybe your trip should be to Alaska because that's not your comfort zone. But looking at things in a whole different way, kind of turning them on their heels a little bit, at least for me, I feel that is where the creative process can be stimulated.
Do you believe that the creative process is the same whether you are writing, painting, making music?
I think it's similar. And you can also draw from music. You know, I listen to classical music when I write. I can't listen to anything that has vocals. That draws me out of it. But I do think that when you're a creator, when you're creative, that how you express that can be very different, but it does have this core inside of you. But at the same time, as much as I love classical music and I love music in general, I could not play a note to save my life. I just don't have that talent. So I do see folks that are able to express their creativity in different ways. Now, whether or not it's all kind of coming again from that zeitgeist in the sky that is giving us what we need to be storytellers, to be creatives, to kind of impart this onto the world, I think that's a different conversation. But I do think that, yeah, we all have something creative inside of us, and some of us have a little bit more, but exactly how we express it and how it comes to fruition can be very, very different.
And just as you said, maybe going someplace out of your comfort zone, if you're like the warm beach, go to someplace that's cold and snowing. Should someone also try that with the writing in terms of if they are a night owl, try getting up in the morning, or no, that different parts of the brain won't work?
You could try it, definitely. I mean, try whatever you think might work for you. Try exercising, taking a walk, taking a drive. I know folks who will drive out into the desert. And I used to think, well, why would you go into the desert? I'm not a desert person. I like trees and green and moisture. Until one time I decided to go to Sedona, Arizona, and then I got it. So sometimes, just doing something different, deciding that you're going to taste something different or experience life different. One of the things you could do too is just crawl into the skin of one of your characters. What would your character do in this situation? Especially if you're having a hard time giving that person some motivations or struggling with their arc, where are they going? If you've written about a 75-year-old grandmother, what would her day be like? Would she walk in the park? Would she feed some pigeons? So being creative and experimental like that, I think it can't go wrong. Now, if you are a night owl and you're forcing yourself to get up every morning and write, and after a month it's not working, chances are it's just not going to work. So you might want to have your routines and do the things that make sense for you. But I'm all for experimenting and finding new ways to tap into that creative energy and just do what works for you.
If this is interesting to you, the first 5 chapters of our book, Story Questions, is all about finding your voice. As thanks, just for watching this video, we're giving you 10% off Story Questions on PayHip. The first 100 people who use the promo code YOURVOICE will get an additional 10% off. During checkout, make sure you click the link Add Coupon and type Your Voice. You get a powerful writing tool and you help support Film Courage. Now, back to the interview. What's your advice to someone wanting to sell their first book?
I think one of the things they should do is find their writing community early on so that they really understand the market and what the publishing landscape is like, and get some advice from other authors too. One of the great things about the writing community, it's very inclusive. I know authors who are huge successes who will then mentor and help out other writers. Going to conferences where you can hang out with other writers, watch them talk on panels, learn during workshops or master classes. I think all of that can really help an author who wants to get that first novel out there, because there's just so much that they don't know early on. Another thing I like to suggest too is working with some kind of writers group. Nowadays, we're fortunate in the fact that you can have a writing community from around the world. You can meet up with people using Zoom or social media or whatever. A lot of organizations in our backyards can be tapped into as well. So no matter where you are in the United States or the world, see if there's any kind of writers group or writers conference, writers retreats that are happening nearby, or maybe even not so nearby. Again, if you do want to travel a little bit, nothing beats going to a writers conference in Kauai, which I did last year and I absolutely loved, because it just, again, it opens up your horizons and it gives you a good idea of what's going on in the market at that time.
If an author is going to self-publish, what platforms do they need to be on?
They're definitely going to want to be on Amazon. There's a really good chance they're going to want to use a platform such as Draft to Digital or Publish Drive. There's other ones out there, but let me just parse something out when it comes to Amazon, because Amazon would love if you just used them. Amazon is a retailer. They do publishing, but they will still never get your book into a library or another bookstore, because first and foremost, they're a retailer. Some types of books can do absolutely fine doing nothing but Amazon. They still do hold a large portion of the market. There's genre fiction, again, romance can be a good example that, maybe you just want to be on Amazon and you want to be an Amazon exclusive author. We generally advise to authors to use Amazon as well as Ingram Spark. Ingram is the world's largest distributor. Everybody uses Ingram. They created Ingram Spark several years back to offer services to small presses and independently published authors or self-published authors. So that's generally what we suggest to folks to use, as a combination of those. But again, they might want to get their book out there on Publish Drive. Barnes & Noble has their own platforms as well. So just do a little bit of research to find out which ones suit you and your goals and your genre the best.
Have you seen authors have success outside of Amazon?
Oh, definitely. Yes. So when it comes to getting the book inside of a bookstore, that bookstore buyer is never going to go to Amazon to order that book. That book is actually on Amazon, is in competition with their bookstore. So if you want to be able to reach a mass market, being on Amazon as well as the others is what's important. The distribution that you can get when you use Ingram, and I'm not touting Ingram over anybody else, it's just one of the few players that's out there. Again, there's Draft to Digital and there's other platforms as well. I don't want to start laundry listing all of them, but that way you can have that distribution in place. So you could be in Target online and Walmart online and Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Kobo, all of the different places. So going back to, some sage advice to those first-time authors that can get caught up into the Amazon ecosystem. Yeah, you can do things there. You can do, freebies and giveaways. They'll give you incentives to be exclusive with them. But if you're able to use the other platforms as well and get the best of both worlds, that's generally what I recommend.
Now, is there sort of a psychology behind the buyers that are in a bookstore versus those that will go online?
That's a really good question. I think, touching pages, the smell of books, people will talk about that a lot. Being able to hold it in your hand and take it with you is definitely something that people who are more tactile really enjoy. I think as far as a market and the money that somebody is willing to spend, they will spend more money on that physical book because it has that intrinsic value. But for people who want to have a full bookshelf, whether it's on Amazon or another online digital retailer, they can have that book on their device. It makes it really easy to travel. If they're off on holiday and they want to read on the beach, they don't want to drag along 10 books with them, but they can definitely have 10 books on their device. So it really, the reading preferences vary. And Audible or audiobooks is another player on the scene too, and that's increasing market share year over year. We're busy, active people in our lives, so being able to listen to an audiobook while we're driving to school, while we're working in the kitchen or working in the garden at night to help us fall asleep, that audiobook market is another one that people want to consider. And Audible is owned by Amazon. Again, Amazon wants to have their market share, but there's also Spotify and some other platforms that are out there too for authors to explore.
Why is it easier to sell a series of books rather than just one book?
People love to binge. We've been trained to watch a whole series on Netflix. Heck, I sometimes won't even start the series until I know it's complete because I just want to go, go, go on my own pace. If I'm into it and I want to go through 3 episodes or 3 books in a week, whatever it happens to be, I can decide the pace that I'm going at. And when a reader falls in love with the characters and the environment and the universe in that story in the book is expansive enough to warrant it, think of like Game of Thrones or the Harry Potter series. There's so many of them where we can go back again and again to those characters and find, new things to learn in this world. So it can definitely be something that gets the readers coming back each time. I'll often suggest to an author who's thinking of doing a series, it's really hard to make that first or even that second book a success. Sometimes the reader doesn't even want to start a series. Again, similar to that Netflix mentality. If they know it's a series and they know that they're going to be waiting a year or more for the second or third book, they might decide to set it aside because they want to read and binge and kind of power through it. The other thing that usually around the third book, it can offer authors from a marketing and a sales perspective is the ability to use book 1 almost as a loss leader. At that point, maybe you want to do your Amazon promotions or try to get a book bub where you're giving away or selling the book at a deep discounted price. You're not necessarily doing that to make money. You're doing it because if they buy book 1, they get book 1 for free, then they buy book 2 and they buy book 3. But that strategy works best usually around the third or so book in the series.
What are the 5 biggest mistakes authors make when writing their books?
5. Wow. Okay. The 5 biggest mistakes that an author makes when writing their book. Okay. I think we touched on this before, but I'll highlight it again, is not having enough editors or the right editors to go through it. I think expectations, and sometimes having unrealistic expectations, can hinder them. If the author is writing that piece of literary fiction with the idea that they're going to become a New York Times best-selling author, first book out of the gate, and become a millionaire, I don't know. Oftentimes I say if money is the motivation for an author, very similar to a lot of creatives. If you want to make money, then maybe you should go into investment banking. Maybe being an author isn't for you because it's really hard to make it. So having expectations that are real matter a lot. Thinking about one's author brand, I'm going to say, is number 3. branding for a lot of authors and people in general, I think, feels a little bit ethereal, a little fluffy and intangible. It's logo design and color palettes and things. I tend to look at it as being, what's your core message? If you're going to stand on a mountain and scream something that you know the world is going to hear, what is it? It's drilling it down, it's log lining it, elevator pitching it, whatever you want to call it, so that you have a clear, defined message to get out there and really focusing on what that brand is. I think another mistake authors make is not having a website. Websites give you the ability, unless something terrible goes wrong and your web developer loses your hosting or something like that, but you should control that. That's a whole nother conversation. But a website is going to give you the ability to be seen by your readers, to be seen by media and press. It establishes your credibility and your authority in that space. And social media is also great. And I'll add that as my number 5 here, with the caveat of being aware that social media can come and go. For example, are we TikToking now or not? You know, we were and then we weren't. But for a hot second, we realized what might happen if TikTok, Book Talk, went away. And that became huge for a lot of authors and a lot of book reviewers, etc. So there's the saying, don't build on rented land. If you have a big, huge following on a social media platform, what happens when that goes away? What happens when a millionaire decides to buy that social media platform and it's just not the same space it used to be? And your readers, your tribe, the people that you want to relate to aren't there. But a website gives you the ability to do all that. And I don't know if we're on 5.5, maybe 6. I also do suggest having some sort of email marketing strategy. I think it's still one of the most powerful types of marketing for an author. I think it's one of the things that authors are afraid of the most because it does take a lot of work. Nowadays, you can also use Substack. So I'll kind of throw Substack in there. There's Discord too. Again, find the place where you feel comfortable. And even if it's just using the free version of MailChimp, or something that is going to get you up and going, you're going to start building your community. And then you can do all sorts of fun stuff when you have those email lists. You can actually use them for your email, your digital marketing down the road. So I think that 5.5 or maybe 6, if you allow me to put an extra one in there, is going to be your email marketing.
So you don't feel that websites will be obsolete in the near future, that they are relevant to have as a central brand message?
It still is relevant. When somebody wants to interview an author, and I've had it happen before, they're going to go to Google, or maybe they'll ask their AI assistant or whatever. However they're doing it, they're going to access and look for that information online. So having your own website that populates on the first page of a Google result, the SERP, the search engine results page, is still really important. And having it look professional and polished. You are judged just like your book cover is probably being judged by folks. The look and the feel of your website, if it looks professional and polished, the person that could potentially interview you on their podcast or invite you onto their radio show, the reader who's deciding if they're going to pick up your book and they see, something that looks, it's grabbing their imagination because they love fantasy and you've got dragons and magical swirls all over the place. So it gives your brand a place to live. It also gives you the ability to have an integrated marketing approach. I mentioned your email marketing before, but you're going to want to have an API basically connecting your website, a sign-up form, to your MailerLite or your MailChimp or whatever, email platform of the week you might be using. But having it there and basically establishing it, making sure you have full control of it, I don't think that's going away anytime soon.
I like how you say full control, so that if, you have the keys to your hosting, basically. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll go down the website rabbit hole just a little bit, because sometimes authors don't even know what's the difference between hosting and my domain name, and should I have them all in one place? How does that work? And oftentimes they will go to a website designer or developer And I've seen it happen so many times where that person then has full control. Or they'll resell the hosting. And I guess if you want to and it's easier, yeah, they're really just being a middle person at that point. If they're a website developer and they're reselling hosting, they just buy a whole block of hosting and they parse it out to all their clients. You can cut out that middle person. You might need to set up like a Gmail account or some kind of special account so that you get notices so you don't let the payments for your hosting go away. Same thing with your domain names. Have the control. So if somebody does develop your website for you and they're doing all of these things, make sure you always have access. Make sure you have your own credentials. Make sure you have your website backed up. You can do that with Google Docs. There's a short list of things that I always suggest that an author does so that they don't lose control of their website.
What are some common questions you get from authors about retaining a publicist?
A lot of times they want to know how many interviews or articles they can expect to get. They want to know what to expect when doing the interviews. One of the things I like to do is coach them. I generally like to dig into their brand, their message, and find out what the talking points are so that they, as the author, are prepared to speak about it, as well as the show, the host, the producer that they're going to be with, so that they know where that interview is going to go. Another thing that a lot of them like to know is just some brass tacks things. How can I use this to my advantage? What can I do with these interviews once I get them? Should I put them on my social media? Yes, of course you should. Can I share them on my website? Can I link to them and do shout outs with other authors when I'm doing these interviews? And I say yes to all of those things, and I like to have a nice comprehensive strategy when it comes to an author who's doing their interviews and getting their PR.
When you first meet with an author, how do you determine whether the book is more of a calling card for their brand or this is actually their product, this is their message to the world, this book?
Yeah, talking to them about their goals a lot of times will reveal that. And if it's more of a business book or it's pulling in their professional expertise, if it falls under the guise of self-help, and I know a lot of times authors don't like that name, or maybe it's a memoir. Nowadays, I just love some of the sneaky memoirs that are coming out where it's a memoir, but they frame it around anecdotes or stories that can help people learn about whatever the thing is that that person wants to share. So figuring out how they want to use that to impact their business brand and their company. Are they going to then take that calling card type book and sell courses? Maybe they themselves have courses or retreats that they want to run. Maybe they want to use it to garner speaking engagements. Maybe the sales of the book matter less, and it's more about, I have this credibility, this brand, because look, I have a book. When somebody writes a book, that says a lot about their stick-to-itiveness and their tenacity and their expertise. It just gives you a little bit more clout and credibility in your professional space. Oftentimes that book, if you're going to be speaking at a convention of realtors because you wrote a book about the real estate market, maybe you want to have 100 books on hand that you can hand out in the goodie bags at the end of it. Because then it's literally your calling card. Now they're reading your book. If you are doing financial advice and you have your own book on your shelf, when clients come in to meet you, that again establishes your brand and your credibility so you can use it that way. Maybe that's where you're handing it out to folks. So there's a lot of ways that you can use that book to help elevate the other aspects of your business. You can even go on, even fiction books. We're talking a lot about nonfiction or business type books, but even fiction books, you can have a whole merchandise line that might build up around it. If you do have that fantasy adventure book and there's some dragons and trolls and magical kitty cats in there, what have you, well, maybe you have a magical kitty cat tote bag and stuffed animal, kids books. can really lend themselves to that too. The Slumberkins brand is one I know that my grandchildren really love. And the Slumberkins books, they're the hard books, the board books. But then they all feature a different stuffed animal plushie. So you get the plushie and you get the message that's in it. So thinking about, from a marketing point of view, how you might be monetizing that kind of a calling card book there's a variety of ways to do it. And again, it really just depends upon some of the goals and what the author wants to achieve.
What if you work with an author and they tell you they themselves don't want to be the brand, they want their book to be the brand?
I have that happen a lot, actually. It really depends upon the book and the author. And we talked a little bit about nom de plumes earlier too, and I've worked with some authors who don't want even their face to be used, and that can create some issues, because nowadays we're used to seeing faces and we're used to seeing folks. That accessibility matters. So if they don't have any kind of a social media presence, they don't want to have a website, they don't want to do all of these things, they're going to put themselves at a disadvantage. And if they are self-publishing, that's going to be really hard. Small presses, hybrid publishers, again, really, really hard. And oftentimes what I tell authors too is, even if you are looking for traditional publishing, and you might have the next great American novel, it could absolutely be the case. But one of the things they're evaluating you on too is your author brand and your presence, the audiences that you've built. So if you have a website, that means you have website traffic. That's an audience. If you have an email list, that's an audience. If you're on social media, your Instagram or Facebook followers, those are audiences. In the marketing part of a book proposal, which is generally done for nonfiction, those numbers are honestly what they're looking for. And if that publisher has to decide, and chances are they're making a lot of these types of decisions on a regular basis, between the author who has zero brand presence, no website, no followers, next best novel in the world, next great American novel, compared to the author who has 10,000 Instagram followers and a professional website and followers on their Instagram. Who do you think the publisher is going to go with? It's obviously the one who's got the followers, unfortunately. So sometimes just having that wonderful, excellent, enticing book isn't enough. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I'm saying those are some of the things to take into consideration.
If an author wants to be a brand, what's an effective strategy?
Looking at what they want to say to the world. What is their underlying message? For fiction writers, that can be a little bit daunting, because they're like, I have these characters that are speaking for me. They feel kind of far removed from their brand. Oftentimes it can relate back into the theme or the message of the story. What is the book really about? And that can feed into their branding. I like to look at branding as being about that core message that's going to follow you all the way through of all of your marketing and PR. That brand and those messages are going to inform your social media. What types of things are you posting about? If you're a true crime writer and you're doing investigations, are you posting about some of the scenes that you've been at? Are you creating this blog post that goes with it? So there's all sorts of things that you're doing all the way down the road to when you're doing your PR and your interviews. So again, if a host or a producer wants to have you on their show, what are the things that you're going to talk about? Is your fantasy novel have some kind of a political or societal message behind it? Because that's something that a show who might not necessarily always talk to authors, they might want to ask you about that. So finding out what that core message is informs all of those steps along the way. For the nonfiction authors, you've got it easier. It's harder when you're fiction and you're trying to kind of dig into the theme. I always say that if your book is 10 ways to lose 10 pounds in 1 month, that's the pitch right there. That's what the topic of the interview is going to be. You're going to be pulling from that for your social media. It really informs a lot of the marketing that you do all the way down the road.
And then what about sharing little bits of your life in your social media to keep people going, that they know this is a real person and they want to be invested not only in your stories, but who you are as a human being?
Absolutely. There's a 80-20 rule when it comes to marketing and social media. 80% of what you put out there should be about you, about your adventures, your pets, your walk on the beach, and any way that it can subtly influence your audience is a great way to go about it too. For example, if you write cozy mysteries and it's set in a cupcake shop, well, maybe you're showing us the cupcakes that you make. Maybe you're on TikTok and you're doing cupcake recipes and, I don't know, dancing around with cupcakes. There's ways that you can really have fun with that so that you're integrating your brand and your strategy together. The 20% of that 80-20 is where you're doing the salesy stuff, the buy my book type of a thing. My book is on sale now, or check out, a lot of times you can post the interviews that you've done or some of the specials that might be going on. Perhaps you're going to a writer's conference. You can kind of combine that salesy stuff with what you're doing personally. But I definitely do suggest that because people are people and we relate to other people. So if we want to kind of get to know that author and feel like we're friends with them and they're somebody that we'd like to hang out with, then heck yeah, there's a good chance that we're also going to buy their book.
How can an author be easy to work with for an editor?
I know so many editors that have told me things on the sly. For them, it is about being accepting to the criticism that they're giving them and being open to possibly making some changes or to working on the manuscript. Now, if that editor is an editor that's with a publisher and they start giving that, the author starts giving them a hard time, that can be, a little bit scary because this is somebody who knows their stuff and they're going to be marketing and putting their book and your book in their catalog. You have a little bit more control again if you're with a hybrid press or a small press. Some of the indie publishers that are out there might give you a little bit more leeway and a little bit more say in what you're doing. And if you're self-published, that's the thing. The editor that you hired is very mercenary. They're like a hired gun. Chances are they might tell you, this is what you should do. I think we should change this. And if you push back, they might just suck it up and do it because that's what they're being paid to do. But I would say to the authors to really listen to that advice. Worst case scenario, find an editor that's going to get you that second opinion if you're really doubting what they're telling you. Editors, just like publishers and imprints and everything else, they have different, expertise as well. So if you've written a murder mystery, you might want to find an editor who's worked in that genre as well. I've seen that happen sometimes where the editor and the author buck heads a little bit, and it's really because the person who's editing it might not necessarily know that genre very well. And again, I'll give another shout out to those beta readers out there. They can sometimes kind of come in and almost be like a third opinion in, a conflict that might be arising between an editor and the author.
What do you tell authors who want to become career writers?
Authors who want to become career writers should really look at their budget and making sure that they can do that for a time where they might not be making income. It takes a while to actually recoup your investment. Being able to get an advance from a traditional publisher is the goal in that case. That's what an advance really was all about And those advances, unfortunately, are getting smaller and smaller and aren't necessarily covering as much as they once did. But the whole idea was you got the literary agent, they got you the book deal. The publisher said, heck yeah, we want this book. Here's your $100,000 so you can spend the next year writing it. So that's kind of part of the goal, is the publishers with that advance would be able to fund the author's dream. Nowadays, that advance, or the idea of it, isn't nearly as lucrative as it once was. In some cases, it takes a while to, make that back. And if you're doing it the self-publishing or the entrepreneurial way, or with any kind of a small press, your advance might be minuscule, if anything. And again, if you're with a hybrid press or you're working on your own, you're the one who needs to be able to afford to live for a while. If you have a significant other, if maybe you've been able to save up a big enough nest egg so that you can do that for a year or so, that might be one way to do it. But I would just really look closely at your budget, your finances, to make sure that you're in a financial situation that can afford that.
And we've all heard famous stories of people getting that advance and not completing the book. And there's that too.
Yes.
And the pressure and maybe their own doubts, things like that come into play.
Yeah, exactly. That does happen as well.
What is an authorpreneur?
That's a self-published author. That's essentially a business in and of themselves. They're the ones who is doing, obviously, writing their own manuscript. Chances are they're doing the layout, the interior files, their metadata, their comp titles. They're putting it up on Amazon, Ingram Spark, all of the places. They are doing it almost all themselves. There's some varying degrees, because even the most talented authorpreneur, like a unicorn, nobody can be all things. So they might need help with their social media, or at least building their website and setting up some of their email marketing lists. In some cases, doing their own metadata or keyword research just might be outside of their skill set. And especially, there are some things that most authorpreneurs probably really do need help with, like their book cover design and things like that. Not saying that there's not authors out there who can do that, but generally speaking, the authorpreneur is the one who does it all. They are not with a publisher at all. And maybe, just maybe, they will be the type that will hire one of those hybrid presses, because that way they're paying this team to essentially do the publishing aspect of it, while they can save time for some of the more creative or fun stuff that goes along with their author journey.
So if we go to the saying of what jack of all trades, master of none, it sounds like that we could run into that, but maybe out of necessity, financial necessity, they kind of have to be the chief cook and bottle washer for their business. And so if you feel that someone may be spreading themselves too thin, any advice on if money is an issue, how can they kind of lessen the burden for themselves?
Look at what they can do, what they're capable of doing. Look at the things that they absolutely are going to need to hire somebody to do. If they are absolutely not an artist and they need a professional book cover, they might want to allocate and budget for that. And look up. I mean, there's general prices in the market that you can, I do know of folks that will do a website for $2,000. Now, granted, I wouldn't recommend doing a website for $2,000, but it's probably better than no website at all. Another way to do it is tapping into your writing community. Again, if you're going to some of those writers' conferences, if you've got a writers group that you hang out with, or if you're with an organization, there might be other authors in there where you can trade some services. I know of authors who will trade, hey, I'm going to help you with your email marketing because I'm really good at MailChimp. I can get your MailChimp figured out. However, I know you're really good with social media and Instagram. Maybe you can give me some advice. So sometimes just trading out some of those services can be a good idea as well.
What are some pros and cons of being a writer with a day job?
It makes it really hard to do some of those fun things like those writing retreats and making sure you have enough time to devote to writing. Obviously, it takes bandwidth. Your day job is going to take 60% of your bandwidth, and then your family's going to take 20. And when you sit down after a long day, do you have the energy to go forward? There's a story of an author who was looking forward to his retirement because then he was going to have all the time in the world to write his manuscript. And he was a published author. He had written for many years while he had that day job. Couldn't wait to be able to devote 8-10 hours. And then the gardening came up and his wife needed some help with this, and they wanted to go on a cruise, and his productivity actually went down. Whereas before, during his professional career, he had put out 10 books. After he retired, he got one more book out there. And then, unfortunately, the end of life caught up with him. So I do suggest to folks to really, I think you're making a good point. Being out there in the world gives you that drive to get it done. If you have to squeeze out that extra hour at the end of the day, even though you're dead dog tired, then you're going to do it. Stephen King did it. I mean, he's a great example of somebody who he would write at night, he was teaching during the day and working his butt off. So I do think that getting out there into the real world, it's almost like exercise, right? It's like, we don't want to get up from that comfy couch and start stretching and walking and going to the gym. But then once we do it, once we're in it, we realize how it's invigorating for us. So I agree, getting out there in the real world and making sure that you're still working. And quite frankly, some of your best ideas might be coming from some of your coworkers and the people that you experience when you're walking down the street.
What if someone says, I don't want to do social media. I'm an author. I just want to write.
Then don't do it. You might be setting yourself up to not getting that book deal like you'd like. Again, if you're up against another author who has 10,000 Instagram followers, that's who they might go with. But in some cases, it doesn't make sense to force an author to go so far outside of their comfort zone that they're just going to be awkward and weird out there on social media. When TikTok first came out, even before it was Book Talk, because Book Talk kind of became a whole community in and of itself, I would often suggest to authors who would ask me, should I be on TikTok? It's the new latest thing. And I would say, are you ready to be a dancing author? Most of them said no, even though there's one or two that have gone on to do really cool things on TikTok. But the point is, if that is not a space that you feel comfortable in, then chances are it's going to show. But really look at some of the social media platforms that are out there, because you might find something that is right for you. I know a lot of authors who migrated from the place that used to be known as Twitter over to Blue Sky because they found community there. It's almost like an invigoration. It's like, oh, this is what it's like. And the next thing you know, you're hanging out with fellow writers and creatives and readers, and you're in a supportive environment. So that might actually be for you. The other thing to consider when we talk about Facebook and Instagram, owned by the same company known as Meta, a lot of folks know that, some don't. But if you're gonna do one, you might as well do the other because they are interconnected. And it's very easy to post from one to the other and build audiences because of that connected tissue between the two. The other thing is, if you're going to do any kind of a digital marketing or advertising strategy, then you really want to have your business account using Meta. That you want to have a page, not a profile. So there's some strategic things there behind the scenes where you might say, I don't want to do social media, as far as I don't want to post things and show people my food and my long walks on the beach. But then if you do want to do advertising, or if you want to hire somebody to come in and do your advertising, they need to have that profile in order to do it. So in some cases, social media isn't just about being social like that. It's having the platform set up so that you can do that advertising, because one thing is reliant on the other.
And what are your thoughts on paying to boost your posts? Certain platforms kind of bottom out after a while. Is it wise to do that, to boost a post?
Yes. And actually with Facebook, they will allow you to do that. And that's a great way to slowly build up your page. So especially if you're just starting out, you just sign up, get a Facebook page. Nowadays, they are very diligent in making sure you're a real person and you're posting good stuff and you're not going to be violating their terms of service and their rules and things. So by doing some boosted posts along the way, you're letting their algorithm know what you're all about. You're giving them some signals that they can trust you, because the last thing you want to do is just start flooding it and not getting your posts seen. There's all sorts of safeguards that are in place behind the scenes that can make the strategy of boosting a few posts at a time kind of a way to work your way up so that you can do some more advanced or more strategic advertising.
Desiree, you said something off camera about trend spotting. Can you clarify what this is?
Sure. In the industry, there's this concept of how does one write to market? In other words, how can I write a book that is going to capture the attention of the publisher or the literary agent? So, trend spotting, like in many industries, it's just kind of looking ahead to see where the puck is going rather than where it's been, so that you can be ahead and, possibly get that book deal. Now, the truth of the matter is I know a lot of literary agents. I've rubbed shoulders with them at writers' conferences, and I've asked them, what are the next trends? What are you looking for? You're here listening to authors pitch their manuscript idea to you. What is the thing that you're honestly looking for? And sometimes agents will say that I'm looking for this type of book and these types of genres, etc. But a lot of times they give you this really frustrating answer of, I knew what they need now, I wouldn't be here doing this. You can't predict that because it's so far in the future. And I think that's one of the frustrating things, is because if everybody is suddenly writing books about wizard schools, right, then the last thing they want to hear is another pitch about a bunch of kids that go to a wizard school. So it's a matter of trying to figure out what is coming, what's going to be popular, in some cases 18 months to 2 or 3 years from now. That's the hard part. But in the world of trend spotting, I do think that there are some genres and there are some tropes that are very popular and are increasing in popularity. For example, I think the whole enemies to lovers type of a trope can be really good. And that goes beyond just the romance. This whole idea of you buck heads with somebody, we've all seen that trope played out again and again. And it just really feels satisfying. The horror genre and some of the different subgenres in horror is really going through a renaissance lately. And I don't know if it's just a reaction to some of the things that are happening in the world, because we have so much going on with technology and AI and disruptions globally, that sometimes the scary stuff gives us a weird sort of comfort. And speaking of technology and sci-fi, I do think that a lot of the techno thrillers and the stuff where we really start understanding and seeing the ramifications of what can come about with AI and robotics and some of the things that are out there. Because as we see this happening in real life, the creatives who are out there are going to be inspired with ideas. And as a society, we want to read that. We want to kind of get an idea of what we can anticipate within the next 5, 10, even 15, 20 years. So those are a few genres that I think are going to be doing really well. And another trope that I like too is, and I think this just kind of ties into the fact that a lot of the stories that we tell nowadays are a little bit deeper and more nuanced. And the idea of that morally gray character, or the villain that turns out to be the good guy. Think of the Joker, for example, and how we just loved getting that backstory and how we saw this very comic book type bad guy. He was cliche on so many levels, and he had that deep story behind him. So when we have morally gray characters and situations, because life isn't always black and white, and I think people are responding to that now, and I think they're going to continue within the next few years.
Sure, sure. Age of Distrust and maybe spy thrillers and things like that.
Exactly.
Right. What are the biggest changes you've seen in the book market in the last few years?
The biggest changes that I've seen in the book market in the last few years, I think, is the way authentic stories are coming into their own again. And I think that's another thing that we can anticipate more so in the future. And what I mean by authentic stories is it can be everything from memoir to true crime. People are craving real stories. Think even about how the podcast world and the true crime genre complement each other. Dr. Death comes to mind. Stories like this where they started off as a true crime type podcast and then it became a series. The same thing is happening with books, documentaries. People are gravitating, I think, to real stories more than ever. There's something that's a little bit satisfying, knowing that there's reality behind it. And being able to sleuth something out, whether it's looking at the Menendez brothers and their situation, JonBenet Ramsey and her situation. I mean, some of these murders and cases go back many, many years, but there's a real fascination behind them. And then, yeah, memoirs and some other true crime type genres as well, and stories that are based on real people. I feel that nowadays, with so much happening that's not real, from AI to deep fakes to people that are very fake online, that there's something that we crave as human beings, being able to actually slip into the skin of a real situation or real people. Ultimately, I think that's what draws us into reading any book. Take AI, for example, which can replicate a lot of things very well. It can tell me a whole story. It could probably write me a novel if I really wanted it to. But it would tend to be very vanilla and feel very trite. But when we have this contract between the reader and the writer, where as a reader, you feel like you are slipping inside the experience of that writer, even if it's fiction, you expect that coming of age story to have some kernel of truth and real authenticness underneath. The nonfiction book, same thing. You want to be guided or given advice from a real human person. So I think real people, real stories, authentic stories is something that people should definitely be looking to write more about in the near future.
Is marketing a graphic novel the same as marketing, let's say, a memoir or a novel?
All of those genres are a little bit different. So a graphic novel or comics, stories like that can tend to do really good at pop culture conventions and with that audience. Again, it all boils down to finding the right audience for it. I love graphic novels. I love, too, a lot of the crossover that we're seeing between video games and television and books. I mean, it's multimedia, right? It all crosses over. So if you're going to be doing something with a graphic novel or something like that, you can tap into what the audience's habits are. What are they doing? Where are they going? As a general rule, they might be younger. I know a lot of graphic novelists who will use Kickstarter to fund it because there's so much work that goes into it. And if you can get enough backers behind it, then you've got not only proof of concept, but you've got your first run, your first orders already in place. So there's some really clever things that people can do in the world of graphic novels and in that whole pop culture type space, so to speak.
Right. Ronda Rousey, I think she was doing that, but maybe, okay, yeah, I'm sure she's one of many, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that whole, the idea of getting backers and getting people to support you, whether it's on Patreon or Kickstarter. Again, there's a laundry list of how to go about this and how to do it. But that really just gives authors so much more options as far as their marketing. I mean, imagine being able to fund your book ahead of time. It doesn't quite lend itself quite as well to a book where it's all just a written book. There's something I think that's satisfying about the visual, the graphics that go along with it. A lot of times people can publish a few initial pieces of art or concepts to go along with it to get people riled up and excited about backing it.
And to that, if an author is going to launch a Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Seed and Spark, do they have to be in their video because they can't just use a book trailer, or maybe they can?
Oh, I think that depends upon the author and what they want to do. There's oodles of different ways to create the different tiers and levels for people to do it. So yeah, as long as somebody's comfortable in front of the camera and that's what they want to do, then they certainly can. But they could do something graphically, a whiteboard type thing. They could do some kind of animation if they don't feel comfortable in front of the camera. It all depends. It's kind of like doing short films or doing a film project. You might have the ability to shoot a short or do a small trailer, and even a book trailer sometimes can be done, even with a limited budget, just to give people an idea of what the vision is all about so that they can understand what the author or authors are putting out there and decide if it's something for them that they want to see come to fruition.